Now, I'm not one to gossip, but I will bring you the tea. Welcome to Chronicle Speaks.
Please, I don't have any time for any gossip now. Eh? Yes.
Look at you.
So we have officially made it to Diddy trial day number 29. We have been keeping up with this trial since day one. We got a break yesterday, and when I heard the word break, you only have to tell me once.
I'm not doing shit. When we go on break, that's just what the fuck we do. We break.
So now that we're back from break, let's recap trial day number 28 so we can jump into trial day 29. So day 28 of the Diddy trial was packed with emotion, explicit evidence, and high-stakes legal arguments. The court continued reviewing disturbing messages and video evidence between Diddy, Jane, and others. The jurors were shown more sealed videos and texts that the prosecutors say highlighted a pattern of sex trafficking and coercion. Now, the defense, however, fought back hard. Diddy's attorneys introduced messages that they say prove Cassie participated in the freak-offs voluntarily, even initiated them, and requested intimate content from Diddy. The judge allowed some messages in, but sustained objections to others. Homeland Security agent Cerciello was questioned on the text threads and travel records, and more videos were played for the jury, although the public couldn't see them due to sealed screens. Now, the defense used this moment to argue that Jane's messages often appeared enthusiastic, undermining claims of coercion. Then came a major legal turn. Diddy's attorneys filed a Rule 29 motion, which is a routine request asking the judge to throw out the case due to insufficient evidence. They argued that there's no proof of a RICO conspiracy, no trafficking, no forced labor, and no intent behind any alleged crimes. They also claimed key witnesses didn't initially report abuse, weakening the government's case. In a moment of formality, Diddy stood before the judge and confirmed he would not be testifying in his own defense, thanking the judge for a job well done. And after that, the defense officially rested their case, and the prosecution confirmed they would not present a rebuttal. The jury was dismissed for the day and told to return on Thursday today for closing arguments, where each side will be given 4 hours to make their final case. The verdict is coming soon, and the stakes couldn't be higher. We are going to get into trial day 29 and so much more, but before we do, please be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss out on any news regarding this case and so much more. Now let's get back into it. So the government submitted a letter on the 24th that had myself and other publications very confused, but let's get into it. So this document is a letter from the government to Judge Arun Subramanian, dated on June 24th, 2025, about the jury instructions in the federal criminal trial against Sean P. Diddy Combs. And here is a detailed breakdown of what the government is saying and why it matters. So why was this letter filed? The judge asked both sides to streamline jury instructions, which means to basically simplify them so they're easier to understand. The prosecution agreed to drop certain legal theories they no longer plan to pursue and proposed clarifying instructions for the jury on complex laws. So you have to think about it. These jurors are not legal experts. They're not law students. They didn't go to school for law. So you have to make sure that they're able to understand before they convict or let Diddy go. So what is the government dropping? Prosecutors say they are no longer pursuing attempted kidnapping under California and New York law, attempted arson like the alleged blowing up of Kid Cudi's car, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. These are being removed from the final jury instructions, but let me clarify. Now, the government argues that certain clarifications are absolutely necessary so jurors don't get confused or misapply the law, especially because sex trafficking and forced labor are complex charges. Here's what they want to keep in. Even if Jane or Cassie had consensual sex with Diddy at first, that doesn't mean later acts weren't trafficking or forced labor. For example, Jane may have entered a love contract willingly, but the jury needs to know they can still consider later non-consensual acts as trafficking. They also want the jury to know that just because Diddy paid Jane $10,000 a month for rent or gave salaries to Mia or Capricorn Clark, that doesn't mean that the labor wasn't forced. Payment doesn't erase coercion or abuse under the law. The prosecution wants the jury to look at the full pattern of Diddy's behavior, not just isolated incidents, to decide if there was coercion. That includes threats to Cassie, violence towards Jane, and abuse of others that victims knew about, creating a culture of fear. The government says that the defense tried to argue that Jane and Mia could have just left if they really did not want to be there, but the prosecution wants the judge to tell the jurors that physical restraint isn't required for a trafficking or forced labor charge. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, how is this even RICO? He didn't receive any money. Well, the government is pointing that out as well. They're saying even if Diddy didn't receive money directly from Jane or Cassie's sexual acts, he can still be guilty if he benefited in some way or trafficked them for someone else. And what the government is saying about the trafficking charge, it's enough if Diddy intended or attempted to make the act happen. For example, when he allegedly dragged Cassie back to the hotel room during a freak-off, it doesn't matter if sex occurred when she got back or not. The fact that he pulled her back into the freak-off, they're saying that's sex trafficking. They also state that the jurors need help understanding reckless disregard. So they ask for more explanation of what it means for Diddy to have reckless disregard, whether Jane and Cassie were being coerced, because that legal term isn't commonly understood. I know this is a lot, but I want us to understand this. So next they have conspiracy instructions. They want more detailed guidance on how conspiracy works, specifically for racketeering and DRUG related charges, so jurors don't ask tons of questions later, which can always prolong deliberations. They also want the judge to affirm that DRUG trafficking automatically affects interstate commerce, so jurors don't get confused about the legal requirement under RICO. Prosecutors want to make clear that if Diddy contacted someone in New York to entice them, that's enough to count as venue, even if the act happened elsewhere. Now, the unanimity clarification. They argue that jurors don't have to agree on all the details, just that one specific instance of sex trafficking occurred. For example, if juror number 12 agrees that Jane was trafficked on one particular night, they don't all need to agree how exactly she was trafficked that night, just that it happened. So they're not dropping charges in Diddy's case, they're dropping legal theories. There's a difference, and I'm going to explain it to you real quickly. So the current charges listed in his indictment are sex trafficking, forced labor, RICO conspiracy, and violent crimes in aid of racketeering. A theory of liability is like a legal pathway. Think of it as how the crime was committed or what law supports the conviction. For example, you can be guilty of sex trafficking by directly committing the act or by aiding and abetting someone else to do it. You can commit kidnapping under California law or New York law. Those are two separate legal theories. So they're no longer pursuing these specific legal theories. Attempted kidnapping under California and New York law, attempted arson under California law, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. They're not asking the jury to convict Diddy under these legal theories anymore, but the main charges still remain: sex trafficking, under direct liability, forced labor, and racketeering. Let's just say you're trying to prove someone committed a robbery. You can argue they personally robbed the bank, they drove the getaway car, or they planned it and gave instructions. If halfway through the trial you realize there's no solid proof that they drove the car, you might drop that argument, but you still are going forward with the case saying they robbed the bank and they planned it. So they may not have proof that Diddy blew up Kid Cudi's car. They may not have proof that he kidnapped Capricorn Clark and had her going back and forth to that warehouse for 5 days. However, they're going to remove the predicate acts, the underlying crimes that form the basis of a bigger crime. But that bigger crime is still there. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's jump into day number 29. Okay, so court begins at 9:37 today. The judge says, "Good morning. We emailed the charge to the parties, but there are still times government is capitalized. We'll change that and instruct about witnesses. There should be no interruptions during closing argument. We're going to all tell the jurors that it will be a shorter day today, longer tomorrow, and then during deliberations, it'll be up to them. Prosecutor Slavic will be in at 10 o'clock to deliver the closing arguments." Alexandra Shapiro says, "There are some italics we want out. The judge says okay. So while we're waiting for the jurors to come in, I just want to note that the prosecutors took 6 weeks to present their case and the defense team took about 30 minutes. At 10:02, the judge says, while we wait, Ms. Comey, do you have the laptop ready? Prosecutor Comey says, I'll defer to Ms. Garagos. Ms. Garagos says, we'll have it ready tomorrow. Judge says, with only the admitted exhibits, I'll ask tomorrow. All right, let's bring in our jury. Now, before the jury actually came in, Diddy was seen thumbing through a briefcase before pouring himself a cup of water. Now, he seemed at ease throughout most of this trial, but on today, his body language suggested that he was a bit nervous. As the jury walked in, he started rubbing his palms together and shifting his weight from foot to foot. You have to realize Diddy's life is now in their hands. All rise. The judge says, give your attention to the parties' closing argument. Today will be shorter, the U.S. closing, tomorrow the defense, the rebuttal, my instructions, and begin deliberations. The jurors who will stay. Prosecutor Slavic said, over the last few weeks, you've learned that Sean Combs is the leader of a criminal organization. He doesn't take no for an answer. He's into kidnapping, arson, forced labor, bribery of security officers, and the brutal crimes of sex trafficking. Consider 2 moments. March 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel, the defendant got violent with Cassie. You saw what happened. He dragged her back to the freak-off. 2024 at Jane's house, the defendant choked and hit her. She ran, couldn't get away. These are chapters in the same book. The defendant counted on silence and shame. He thought that his fame and wealth and power put him above the law. Over the last 7 weeks, you've heard how he used his staff to promote his power. No one could stop him. We'll talk about RICO, including sex trafficking and transportation for prostitution, which are also separately charged as standalone crimes. You may have heard of racketeering. When someone commits a crime as part of a group, they are even more dangerous. A group of people whose purpose was to serve and protect the defendant. It's his kingdom. Everyone was there to serve him, fulfilling all of his desires, including his sexual desires. We need to show at least 2 racketeering crimes. The defendant was head of Combs Enterprise. There was an inner circle, his chief of staff, his bodyguards. The names changed, but the roles remained the same. You've heard KK, Christina Coram, Combs' right brain. She lived in 2-star. She communicated with the defendant's girlfriend, his security. You heard their names, D-Rock, Bonds, Ruben, Uncle Polly, Fahim. They were armed and ready. Remember the incident at the diner with Suge Knight? David James told you Combs had guns. In the search, law enforcement found guns, including a rifle with a serial number defaced in LA, 2 AR-15s with their serial numbers cut out in the defendant's closet. You also have the rotating cast of assistants paid by the defendant's business. Brendan Paul said he made $100,000 a year. KK made 6 times that. Damn, Christina. When your boss asks you to buy DRUGS, you're committing a crime. When you kidnap someone or locked his girlfriend in a hotel room after your boss stomped on her face, it's a crime. The law does not require us to know that they like committing these crimes. You saw KK chiding the defendant to not be so reckless, but she got him cash, DRUGS. She was a member of the enterprise. It impacted interstate commerce. Minimal is fine. Combs knowingly became a member. He was the boss. He was the through line. The racketeering acts, distribution of DRUGS, kidnapping, arson, bribery, facilitating sex trafficking of Cassie and Jane, forced labor, travel for commercial sex cover-up. You only need to find that someone would commit 2 acts in any of these categories. It could be 2 acts of DRUG distribution, 1 kidnapping, just 2. You have far more than 2. Let's start with the DRUGS, an essential ingredient of the freak-offs. The most involved were D-Rock, KK, and Fahim, but others helped to keep the DRUG supply high. We are not talking about marijuana, but what Brendan Paul called hard DRUGS. There are stipulations of the DRUGS found in the searches. Cocaine, meth, oxy, ketamine, a dissociative drug, GHB, mushrooms, Molly, Tusi, a combination dyed pink. It's 1305 and 1306. The quantities are not relevant. It's not an element of this crime. Distribution does not require a sale. You know the names of the DRUG dealers by now: Guido, One Stop, and Baby Girl. Jane told you that on 2 occasions she was told to bring DRUGS when she flew to meet him. She coordinated with KK. It's corroborated by text messages. KK told her to swing by Mapleton to pick up the Guido package. He was called during hotel nights, so we know what Guido's package was. More ecstasy. The security team knew what it was. Guido texts Fahim, "Puff has a $450 balance with me." Brendan Paul asked for $780 for personal Gucci items. That is hard DRUGS. DRUGS were distributed. It doesn't matter. He wasn't buying kilos or selling them. Personal use is just a distraction. They bought and distributed to people around them. Cassie used DRUGS at every freak-off, supplied by the defendant. He introduced Jane to DRUGS, gave them to her at all but one hotel night. He gave DRUGS to Carrie Morgan and Banham Bongolan. He made Brendan Paul try Tusi to see if it was good. D-Rock would text One Stop, "Need to see someone for bro." That is the defendant. Guido asked Fahim to cover for the defendant's DRUG debt. KK knew he was distributing DRUGS to women for the Wild King nights. Jane told KK she was having a bad come down. KK gives pro tips how to deal with it. Plain and simple, this is a DRUG distribution. How about kidnapping? They committed them both under California and New York law. Consider Cassie. Bond made her stay put. The defendant called Cassie a slut. He stomped on her face. She was disfigured. Roger Bonds caught her and brought her back. The defendant made her go to the London Hotel on Sunset so no one saw her. She wanted to go home to her mom, but no. It's clear that Cassie didn't consent to staying at the London Hotel. David James testified the defendant demanded to see his search history to see if he posted that the defendant assaulted Cassie in the club. Then there's Capricorn Clark. They made her take a lie detector test for days in an empty office building in Manhattan. This is around 2004. She was holding expensive jewelry that went missing. Uncle Polly took her to the future headquarters of Bad Boy where she was tested 5 times for lies. The man administering the test told her that if she failed, she'd end up in the East River. In Central Park, the defendant told her if anything happened, he'd have to unalive her. David James remembers this. He was tested too, to get the rat out the team. In December 2011, Rube helped the defendant kidnap Capricorn Clark. It started on December 22nd, 2011. The defendant banged on Capricorn's door with a gun. He was out for revenge. He barked an order at Capricorn. "Get dressed. We're going to have to unalive Cuddy." Then they drove to Kid Cudi's house. The defendant had a gun in his lap. This was kidnapping. He moved her a substantial distance. He told her he wouldn't let her go until she brought him Cassie, who he kicked when she arrived, into a fetal position. Cassie, who was with Kid Cudi that morning, testified to this. The officer who responded to the 911 call said he saw a black Escalade registered to Bad Boy. Then on January 12, 2012, the defendant had Kid Cudi's car set on fire. Arson. Someone cut out a hole in the roof of Kid Cudi's car and dropped a Molotov cocktail. We're not suggesting the defendant cut the hole. He didn't even buy his own soup. You heard the voice notes. He said he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car. What are the odds? He says it and it happens. The coincidences just keep coming. The defendant and Ruben just happened to be there a few weeks before. Kid Cudi was driving the same Porsche that night of the trespass. What are the odds? Kid Cudi had conflict with no one except the defendant. Then D-Rock brought Kid Cudi to the defendant, who was looking like a Marvel supervillain. Years later, the defendant apologizes to Kid Cudi. Then there's bribery, the 2016 video. The defendant was having a freak-off with Cassie and one of the defendants, Jules. Flores found the defendant sitting in a chair with what he called a devilish stare. In the room, he saw another man. The defendant tried to hand Flores a stack of money. It was his first attempt at a bribe that day. As Cassie leaves, Combs starts damage control. The judge says, "We had a power issue. Is your mic working?" Slavic says, "Hello?" "Yes." He called Cassie over a dozen times. The text, "Call me. Cops are here." He was just manipulating her, but the defendant knew he could be arrested because there was a video of the assault. He went and banged on Cassie's door with a hammer. Neighbors were going to call the police. In fact, they did. Carrie Morgan had the LAPD officer's card. KK suggests, say they had a fun drunk night. She calls and reaches Eddie Garcia. Eddie says no. Then KK shows up in person. He won't show her, but says off the record, it's bad. KK has the defendant call Eddie on his personal cell phone. Once Eddie says his boss will do it for $50,000, the defendant calls him Eddie My Angel. That's how he's saved in the cell phone. Eddie goes to deliver the USB. D-Rock and KK are there. The defendant counted out dollar by dollar the bribe. Eddie told you the security guard told him he came up with the defendant. That was D-Rock. Eddie asked the defendant, what if Cassie calls the police? So the defendant knew. Eddie finds the ID of the stand-in for Flores. NDAs are signed. Don't speak to anyone. Now Combs is sitting with his chair pushed back from the defense's table, and he's looking around. Diddy's pretty nervous today. Now Slavic continues, paying for silence is influencing testimony. In their opening, the defense suggested it was just about bad publicity. Police involvement would hurt him. There are two connected. The next racketeering predicate is sex trafficking. The defendant's inner circle assisted, whether they wanted to or not. Threats, drugs, lies, and illegal violence to make them have sex with escorts. This is not an attempt to criminalize dysfunctional relationships or personal sexual behaviors. They did not want to have sex with strangers while the defendant masturbated. They were covered in oil and sore over and over again. We are not asking you to find that every hotel night or freak off was sex trafficking or even the majority. You only need to find the elements were met one time. One freak off. That's it. He's guilty. But it was way more than once. Let's start with Jane. Turn off the public screens. Now Combs is still in his chair, pushed back from the defense's table, at which Xavier Donaldson and Alexandra Shapiro have their chins in their hands. Consider the sobriety party, and in Jane's house. Let's start with the love bombing stage. Jane was head over heels. They traveled to the Caribbean. Dr. Hughes talked about this. She never met with any witness, but it was like she knew them. Love bombing is a tactic. He was grooming her. He gave Jane ecstasy. She fell to the ground convulsing. The defendant liked baby oil and red lights. Then introduced in May 2021, she wanted to please her partner. She was high. The defendant had a freak-off set up that very night. An escort came. Jane was excited by the first experience. She didn't realize she had opened Pandora's box. It became 90% of their relationship. For a while, she went along with it. Then she said she wanted it to stop. There were more texts about this. Shown with the screen off. Jane wrote, I wanted to do things outside these rooms, to travel with you. The defendant ignored Jane's discomfort. Those hotel nights were not about what Jane wanted. They were about what the defendant wanted to see. He decided how long. Jane said if she was going to have sex with strange men, she wanted to choose. The defendant made her ask for the nude photos. These were not for her. When she asked to use protection, the defendant was not happy. He was dismissive and condescending. She would try to have it go faster. He'd order her to slow down. It was about what he wanted. He dangled carrots. He gave her gifts and money. He lied to her repeatedly. She asked. He said they'd go on a yacht, but they didn't. Here's what Jane wrote in her notes app. I don't want to have you use me to fulfill your freaky wild desires in hotel rooms. He used his payment of her rent as leverage. The carrots turned into sticks. She wrote that the threats and innuendos are non-stop. He paid for her veneers because he didn't like her teeth. Then said, look at the roof over your head and your pretty mouth and teeth. He wanted the all-star party, sex with 3 men. She sent him a picture of her menstruation. He sent the following voice note. Combs' voice is playing. I'm about to really disappear on you. I don't have time for this, baby girl. You got me on my job. You got to get on your job. This message couldn't be clearer. Not going to take no for an answer. After reading Cassie's lawsuit, Jane writes to the defendant, I feel like I'm reading my own sexual trauma. 2 of my birthdays, you forced me. Slavic then states that she wrote, you gaslit me. It was sexual exploitation. You framed as love for your sick fetishes. The defendant called her and tried to trick her into saying that it was all consented to. He fed her a false narrative. Now they're listening to the clip. He's talking over her. Dr. Hughes told you how a victim is trauma bonded to her abuser. Jane often felt the defendant didn't listen to the truth. She said Sean would just say to move on. He told her to charge him. The lawyers would be involved to buy her silence. So she asked for $100,000 a year for her to move on. She thought it was reasonable. Far less than Cassie. The defendant went ballistic. She refused to adopt to his false narrative. You can read the text. However, they can't because the screens are still off. Jane wrote that the defendant was going to show her sex tapes to the father of her child. Then he reached out and told her to come to see him in Miami. She makes it clear she does not want a hotel night. He says okay. Despite his promise, he called an escort. Now here are more threats about the rent. Jane writes, I hate worrying about the rent. This is in 2024. It all accumulated in June 2024. He assaulted her and forced her to perform oral sex on an escort. This is sex trafficking. It was interstate, and the Astroglide crossed state lines. The defendant knew or recklessly disregarded that force. Threat of force, coercion, or force were used. Consenting once doesn't mean she consented every time. One time is enough. Now, in 2023, he made Jane feel she'd have a proper NYC weekend, but invited escorts. Jane sent him another message. It's dark and sleazy, in fear of losing my home. His response, girl, stop. Then he FaceTimed her and told her about shopping and dinner. But he lied. Look, now the public screens are still off for the summary chart. He is also texting Paul Arthur, an escort. Look at these messages. He is setting up a hotel night. When she is in the air, he tells her he has a surprise for her. She didn't want it. Now, before the plane even lands, he completes an act of sex trafficking. He tricked her. Then, under coercion, she calls Carol to come to New York. In the next text, she texts, in New York, I knew you would pair me up with a random person. In the sobriety party without DRUGS, she is so disgusted. She vomits. She writes, I'm not a PORN star. I'm not an animal. I need a break. The defendant responds, let's spend the day. No strangers. She replies, you'll love bomb me. He switches from carrots to sticks. The house. He texts, are you going to let me into your house? 8 times. Then he said he was sick and needed her. She went and had sex with 3 men without DRUGS. After vomiting, he says, get back out there. In 2024, in Jane's house, 3 months after Homeland Security agents searched the defendant's homes, they used Jane's house. He came there. They were supposed to have a fun date night. They drank and they argued. She pushed his head into a marble counter. He shouted at her. She told him to leave. She ran and closed doors. He kicked down 3 doors. You saw the doors. Here's one of them on the screens. Yet the screens are still off for no reason. She ran without shoes. She hid. He was waiting. Jane hit the defendant. He punched her in the face. Here are the photos. Public screens are still off. He dragged her by her hair back into the house. Jane took his phone and called the other woman. She shouted. The defendant called Jonathan Perez. He followed her into the shower and hit her, knocked her down. He called Anton, the escort, and told her to have sex with him. She put on makeup to hide the injuries. She drove to pick up Anton at the gate. Then the defendant said, take this effing pill. He put his face inches from hers and asked, is this coercion? He was brazenly acknowledging he was breaking the very same law he violated before. Jane didn't want to have sex with this escort that night. She said no, but he would not take no for an answer. Jane performed oral sex until Anton got him. The defendant told his security to bring cash to Anton. They didn't have it. The next day, he gave Jane the money to pay Anton. She Ubered the bag of money over to him. This was coercion. Judge says, Ms. Slavic, at the appropriate time, let's break for lunch. Slavic said this would be a fine time. Judge says, okay, jurors, you may eat. Now they're at break. Okay, it's 1:25 and they are back. Ms. Slavic, are you ready? Says the judge. Prosecution says, just to flag for the court, we are going to need to change PowerPoints. Clerk says, can we power the public screens? Well, apparently not. They haven't been working all morning. All rise. The jurors enter. Judge says, Ms. Slavic, you may proceed. Slavic says, let's go back. The 3 nights were part of a buildup from fraud to coercion to finally force. Beep, beep. You hear a lot of loud beeping. Prosecution says, I apologize. Judge says, do you need to change the batteries?
The ghetto.
I'm not sure who's been charging the devices at night, but to whoever it is,
You about to lose your job.
the courtroom deputy says, Miss Slavic, do you need batteries? AA. Combs is still in his chair, pushed back. Now his legs are crossed, his hands are crossed. You know, if he was producing this would have never happened. Anyway, let's continue. Slavic says the house was just an example of the defendant's financial coercion of Jane. Also DRUGS. became a necessary part of SEX. Jane told you about Miami in 2024. He gave her liquid Molly. They showed you video. They'll argue that she was super into it, but she was super high. His coercion included threats to release tapes of her having SEX in the hotel rooms. Combs threatened to send her SEX tapes to her child's father. This was to coerce her into having more commercial SEX acts. The defense has suggested that Jane agreed to those hotel nights. Let's talk about what agreeing means. Theirs is an incomplete picture. Let's turn to volume 2. We're going to talk about Cassie with several examples. You know from sitting through this trial that force was not limited to these days. Through the decades they were together, he forced her to have SEX with escorts. Cassie was 19. He was in his late 30s. He signed her to a 10-record deal. He took her on a yacht and gave her ecstasy. They had SEX. They were in a relationship. She had just turned 21. The defendant was her boss, who called all the shots. He molded her. He told Capricorn, "Let me show you," then ordered Cassie around. She did it. Walk and turn around. Total compliance. He didn't take no for an answer. He was abusive. Physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual. They want you to call this domestic violence, but he was forcing her to have freak-offs. He controlled everything. He demanded that her nails be done a certain way on red carpets. The Vanity Fair party in 2014, Deontay Nash told you. He shouted. Combs shouted. "I thought I told y'all she had to have her hair up." He wouldn't let her make money from her music. She was offered the chance to do a common video. Puff said no. He paid for her car, clothing, phones, and vacations. He made her dependent. He did it to her family too. After he found out that she was with Kid Cudi, he demanded $20,000 from her parents to pay him back, or he'd release her SEX tapes. That month, in just this account, he had $3.2 million coming in and out. This was all about control. Remember what Dr. Hughes said, when a victim is on unsure footing, the abuser has control. He punched her, kicked her, and dragged her. When it was bad, he hid her in hotels to heal and not be seen. You saw photos and videos. D-Rock, Rube, Polly, they all knew. He attacked her for attending a Prince party until Prince's security intervened. Mia and Maya Morales described abuse to you. Cassie told you. When she got to the house, he threatened to release her SEX tapes. He assaulted her in Jamaica. He beat her up in Las Vegas while she was curled up under the toilet. She said D-Rock cried. There was his assault at the Intercontinental Hotel, caught on tape. For Cassie, it was her normal. She was there when he attacked Mia, Deontay Nash, and Vanna. Vanna may have gotten the date wrong, but she was definitely injured. One time he had Cassie hold guns for him. The diner and the Suge Knight incident, Cassie was in the house. She saw. Why didn't she leave? Ms. Hughes explained that hitting leads to fear. Even when Cassie was in South Africa, she could not get away. KK kept calling. D-Rock was loyal only to the defendant. He played both sides. He talked to Cassie, then reported it back to the defendant. She's about to get iced up. I told her to chill out, he said. They met for dinner in Malibu. Then he RAPED'd her on the living room floor. She said no. She cried, but he didn't take no for an answer. He RAPED'd her. He wrote, "I could tell I didn't turn you on yesterday." That's it. That is, he RAPED'd her. Because of the trauma bond, after the RAPE, she met him at a friend's party and then had SEX, consensual SEX. This was a trauma bond. He had an MO, an hours-long performance. He pleasured himself and sometimes filmed it, just like with Jane. Sometimes the defendant told escorts to urinate on her. Sometimes he urinated himself. Why? To turn himself on. She became a DRUG addict. Here she wrote, "I love our freak-offs. When we both wanted, jurors, this is not an all or nothing situation. There were times he knew she didn't want to do it. That is SEX trafficking. She obviously didn't want to have an escort urinate in her mouth while she lay on the floor. Let's talk about the videos. You've seen clips. You don't see weapons. You see her having SEX. Masturbating. Then the defendant is moving the camera around, at times focusing on the escort, not Cassie at all.
Are you homosexual?
A what?
A homosexual.
It's clear this is about his fantasy, not Cassie's. March 5th, 2016, in the Intercontinental Hotel. The video. Before the Intercontinental Hotel, Cassie had a premiere. It was a big night for her. She agreed to a freak-off as damage control. Look at this. She says, I don't want you thinking I don't want to. She knows the defendant won't take no for an answer. The defendant gets Jules to come. You know what happens? An argument. The defendant hits Cassie in her face. All she can think about is her premiere. She takes off without her shoes. The Intercontinental video is shown. He throws her to the ground. He kicks her and drags her back to the room where Jules is waiting. Why is the dragging relevant? Because Jules is there. Freak-offs have multiple sessions. They were between sessions. He leaves her, but he takes her bag, but she doesn't follow him. Instead, Cassie is using the phone in the elevator lobby. The defendant is making another conscious decision to take the bags into the room and come back for Cassie with his hands free. He grabs her phone, then he makes the decision to stay. He stays even though he is in a towel and looks ridiculous. Flores arrives. He stalls in the hall. He knows Jules is still in the room, possibly naked. The defendant claims he took back drugs that day, but you can see he is in control. Cassie just wanted to get her bag and phone and leave. The defendant offered Flores money. This is a photo of Jane in the car back to her house with sunglasses, her black eye. He was using his force to get Cassie to continue with the freak-off. The defendant may tell you the violence was not connected to the sex, but it was an attempt to get Cassie to continue with the freak-off. Later, she wrote to him, I'm not a rag doll. I'm someone's child. There were freak-offs in New York with Daniel Phillip. Daniel Phillip was not paid for his time. This is a ridiculous argument. In one freak-off between sessions, the defendant told Cassie to come in the bedroom. She kept using the computer. The defendant threw a bottle, dragged her, and slapped her. Daniel Phillips heard Combs yell, "Bitch, when I tell you to come here, you come here." After that, Daniel Phillip could not perform, but a completed act is not required for sex trafficking. This is sex trafficking. In Cannes, they were at the film festival. The defendant accused Cassie of stealing his drugs. He threw her off the boat they were staying on. Mia heard an audio of this and recognized the voices. They flew back to New York. She traded seats to get away, but he followed and showed her the freak-off videos. He threatened to release the sex tapes. When they got to New York, they had a freak-off. This is another example of clear-cut coercion. He threw her off the boat without her passport. He wanted Cassie to be afraid to say no to him. Cassie said, "I didn't know what turned into. He could be violent." The defense said Cassie made a choice every day to stay with him. Step back. Imagine yourself as Cassie. This was the force. This was the leverage. There were the drugs, disassociative, and numbing. She needed the buffer. Yes, some of the messages are explicit. That doesn't mean she wanted to have sex with escorts at freak-offs. In 2009, he wrote, "You're supposed to be seducing me all day." Cassie told the defendant that she didn't want to do freak-offs. Take her birthday party Deontay told you about. He demanded she freak off, and she did. What choice did Cassie have in the end? She did not have freedom to make voluntary adult choices. Let's go back to count one for a minute. While it was the defendant in the freak-off, but he had help from KK, D-Rock, and Fahim. They knew it was wrong. How did they facilitate? KK got strange men access to rooms the defendant and Cassie shared. KK got Clayton Howard, also known as Dave, access to the room. Jonathan Perez found the video of Cassie having sex with an escort. He showed it to KK. She knew. Fahim saw it too. Fahim got drugs to the defendant even during the freak-offs between sessions. On February 18, 2024, after Jane told KK still sent stuff for the Wild King Nights. D-Rock iced Cassie's black eye. It would be absurd to think that D-Rock didn't know what they were doing. Of course he knew. I expect the defense will say they didn't know. David James saw a stranger. Deontay Nash saw one. Jonathan Perez saw video of Jane having sex with another man while the defendant watched. Interstate travel for prostitution. The defendant paid escorts. He caused the travel. He sometimes booked it. The transportation counts do not require force, fraud, or coercion, even if all consented. We know that's not true. It's still a crime. It's just knowing transportation with the intent the individual engaged in prostitution. For count 3, the freak-offs involving Cassie. The escort's travel was often booked by travel agents. She remembered Dave Clayton Howard. He would travel from New York to Miami or LA. Another escort traveled to Ibiza, GX 1402. This was Jules Theodore at the London Hotel in New York City. The defendant asked for Jules' name for the ticket. The defendant's American Express shows he paid for a car. There's a $2,000 bill from the London Hotel. The defendant texts, "I will tip you." For what? SEX. And here, Reggie flew from Las Vegas to LA for SEX. He is never tired. Jane sent $1,100 via Cash App. Here is the hotel folio. $4,000 of damage. The hotel staff found bodily fluids on the floor. It couldn't be clearer. Every time KK helped arrange travel for the Wild King Nights, she was part of the crime. She may not have liked it, but she did it. KK set up travel for a Wild King Nights in Vegas. Combs' voice on the voice note says, the wildest Wild King Nights in Vegas. KK knows. KK helped Cabra book his travel. Combs asked her for cash. She knows exactly what is going on. She facilitated travel for the escorts. Each is a racketeering act. You only need to find 2 acts. Just here, there are dozens. Afternoon break? Judge says okay. Now we go to break. Okay, at 3:31, they are back when Judge Subramanian asked the prosecutor how much time she had left. She said about 1 hour. He says, all rise. The jurors are entering. I expect the judge will instruct you on forced labor. She shows the chart. You heard of forced labor of 4 women, Cassie and Jane, Mia and Capricorn. Now, with Cassie and Jane, it was grueling sexual services. Cassie called them grueling up to 4 days, maybe even more. Jane said the same thing. Cassie and Jane were on call to perform freak-offs for the defendant whenever he wanted, wherever he wanted. He used force and threats of force. He would say, let's finish on a high note. Let's push through. You're not tired, are you? It took weeks to recover from these freak-offs. That's forced labor. KK kept setting up hotel rooms and flights. Let's turn to Mia. She worked for Combs. Finally at Revolt, she went 5 days without sleep. Combs sexually assaulted her. He put his hands up her dress. He came into her bedroom and penetrated her. He came into the closet and forced her to perform oral sex on him. There was a time in the bathroom of the private jet she can't fully remember. Repeated traumatic events. She was clear as a bell even under cross-examination. She performed labor and services, including sexual services. He threw her against the wall and slammed a door on her arm. She saw violence at Prince's party and in Turks. When they were in South Africa, KK told Mia, if you don't call him in 10 minutes, you don't have a job. He has all the power and control. She knew she couldn't say no, even to little things. Mia knew that her job was to protect the defendant. HR was for Combs. She couldn't go to the police due to Combs having all the power. The threats left her with no options. I expect you're going to hear that she could have left, that she told Combs she loved him. Mia pulled no punches. There were high highs, and there were also low lows. Capricorn Clark had an issue with overtime. She took the issue to the head of HR, Vashta Wilson, but HR was the defendant's puppet. The defendant and Uncle Polly threatened her in Central Park and the lie detector test and taking her to Kid Cudi's. Capricorn had a son to provide for. Combs threatened to blacklist her. Now, witness tampering and obstruction after Cassie filed her lawsuit. This weaves the whole story together. Jane wrote, you gaslit me. She posed a problem for the defendant. So Combs called Jane. The calls were recorded on KK's phone. You can listen to them. On November 19, 2023, Cassie's lawsuit was already settled, but he is afraid of criminal investigation. He calls and asks, what can I do to make you feel better? He says, I can't be speaking on the phone. He is worried the U.S. will get 3 years of his text messages with Jane. While he's recording the call, he tries to convince her that she was willing. He says, we just did some kinky shit I thought we both enjoyed. Do you hear on the recorded call the sounds of notes being taken with a Sharpie to plan how to get what they want Jane to say? You've seen that in this trial. The lawyers passing notes to each other. Then Combs had D-Rock reach out to Mia, asking her to say something. Mia told you her reaction to this call. She had seen the defendant bashing Cassie's head. D-Rock had seen it too. He was asking her to agree with the lie. As the federal investigation grew, they kept reaching out to Mia. D-Rock calls her 5 times in a row. The chart Ms. Sanker presented to you brings this all together. The defendant's conduct towards Mia is also obstruction and witness tampering. Also obstruction, the video of the intercontinental assault is bribery, but it's also obstruction. Finally, we have venue. We only have to show an act in the district. Doesn't have to be criminal. The Southern District of New York includes Manhattan and the Bronx. Count 2, freak-offs in Manhattan. Count 3, freak-offs, jewels to the London Hotel in Manhattan. Count 4, Jane in Manhattan. You spent 7 weeks listening and a lot of evidence was hard to hear or see. You heard from Kid Cudi, whose house was broken into and whose car was burned. You heard from Regina Ventura, Deontay Nash, how he ran the enterprise with total control. It's time to hold him accountable. It's time to find him guilty. Judge says we'll continue tomorrow. Jurors, do not watch or read anything about the case. All rise. Whew, that was a lot. That was a mouthful. What I need to do is hear from you. What do you think about the prosecution and their closing arguments? Leave a comment and you know how we do. We'll talk about it down below. Talk to you guys later. Bye. Thanks for watching, but before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any of my new episodes.